To understand that ultimately the fate of healthcare, especially mental health care, really lies in our own hands. As consumers, as family members, as advocates, at the end of the day, the only way we're going to make the laws work for us is if we work to make those laws effective. And tonight we're going to have these hearings to begin the discussion as to how do we involve consumers in taking back the decisions that affect their lives in the most personal, profound ways when it comes to the care of their loved ones that are too often denied by insurance companies, denied by government, because the perception is that these issues of mental health do not constitute real health, that somehow the brain is not part of the body, somehow mental illnesses are not physical illnesses. And that age-old stereotype and stigma that continues to pervade these issues that leads people to not appeal when they're denied, that leads insurance companies to know they can get away with murder when they deny people life-saving care because they know that the stigma of these illnesses force people into isolation and so forth. But we have a lot to talk about tonight, but we have, most importantly, a group of individuals who are willing to tell their own stories because, you know, Congressman Ramstad, myself, and the rest of the members can talk about the legal issues and the laws, but at the end of the day, I think what's going to be most compelling to public policymakers as well as insurers and everyone else who are stakeholders in this field is to hear from people and their real experiences so that we can know why it is so important that we do the right thing. So at this time, before we introduce the panel, I'd like to acknowledge my good friend and colleague, my Republican colleague, but I want to acknowledge here that just as in the case when my father worked for years with Orrin Hatch and many other Republicans, when it came to the national interest, Republicans and Democrats worked alike together because they were working for the Americans' interest. And I think that this issue is clearly knows no partisan boundaries. And so it is such an appropriate thing that Jim is not only a good friend, but he does represent the Republican side of this issue, which is really the same side as the Democratic side at the end of the day. So we'll give a great round of applause.
Jim, I'm a recovering alcoholic and a recovering Republican.
Hey, Jim.
I feel very much at home right here. I really mean this very sincerely. Chris's district, your district, is very much very similar to the district I represented. People who care about those less fortunate, people who care about those suffering the ravages of mental illness and chemical addiction, people who value education, people are willing to spend money for the right investments in government, and people who attend town meetings. And so it's really good to be here. And your district, you have a long, proud tradition of the best and the brightest as far as representatives of Congress are concerned. And Chris Van Hollen fits that description perfectly. He was a great colleague when we had the pleasure to serve, when I had the pleasure to serve with him, and I think the world of him. And of course, my friendship with respect for Patrick Kennedy knows no bounds. Patrick has been a dear friend for 15 years now, and we go way back. And I have so much respect for his commitment to this cause and to other causes that relate to people who are. I woke up in a jail cell in Sioux Falls, South Dakota on July 31st, 1981. I was under arrest for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, failure to vacate the premises, and a number of other charges. And I'm alive and sober today, almost 31 years later, only because of the access I had to treatment for my alcoholism. But despite the legislation that I co-sponsored with Patrick, with Chris Van Hollen was a co-sponsor, with Senator Kennedy God rest his soul, on the other side, Senator Domenici, and it was started by Senator Paul Wellstone in 1996, the drive to pass this legislation. Despite this legislation, and the number of years we've worked on it, and the bill, by the way, was signed into law by President George W. Bush in 2008. Last time I heard, George W. Bush was a Republican, very much so. So it had bipartisan support, absolute bipartisan support. But despite the fact that we passed the bill in 2008, President Bush signed it in 2008, hundreds of thousands of Americans in health plans are being denied their rights under the federal parity law. Hundreds of thousands of Americans today are being denied their rights under this parity law. Many insurance companies have put plans in place that circumvent both the parity law and the interim regulations, thereby restricting the patient's access to life-saving care. For example, as outrageous as it sounds, many health plans are excluding residential treatment for substance abuse. Excluding. No residential treatment. Other plans continue to require patients to fail first at outpatient care before allowing them to go into inpatient care. You have to fail first. Well, that makes a lot of sense. From a health standpoint, from a cost standpoint, no, I don't think so. But, and that's, by the way, the insurance companies that are requiring this fail first policy, that's regardless of other medical necessity criteria being met. All the other medical necessity requirements can be met, and still, that's their policy. It's outrageous. It's shameful. It's blatant abuses by health plans that are illegal and that must be stopped. This discriminatory treatment needs to be addressed immediately. Federal regulators must enforce the new regulations, and I believe it's absolutely unconscionable that a final rule has not been issued. Again, the bill was signed into law October 4th of 2008, and it's 2012, and we still don't have a final rule. The fact that 4 years have passed makes it unconscionable. There's no excuse in the world for the failure to enforce parity. Access to treatment for people suffering the ravages of drug and alcohol addiction is not just another public policy issue. It's a life or death issue for millions of Americans. I respectfully, and I mean that term sincerely, I respectfully call on Secretaries Sebelius, Solis, and Geiger to issue a final rule on parity without further delay. Thank you.
So my father was very involved with his brothers on the civil rights movement in our country in the 60s. And it was a woman named Rosa Parks who, when she was told to once again go to the back of the bus, this time decided no more. So we're hoping with these parity hearings to find Rosa Parkses out there who are willing to appeal their decisions when they're denied treatment for mental illness. And in doing so, open up a new movement, similar in scope to civil rights, because at the end of the day, this notion of denying people care because they are marginalized and discriminated against based upon stereotypes and bigotry unfounded in any acknowledged science or truth, means that these are issues not just that are medical issues, these are moral issues of whether we as a people are going to treat each other with dignity and respect, just as we would, irrespective of color of skin, gender, or creed, or any of the other issues of civil rights. So we are honored tonight to have people who are willing to speak up on these their own individual stories, and in a way begin to chip away at that process of being silent. Because silence, as it was in the AIDS movement, silence is equal to death. And thankfully, for people who are here tonight to speak up, they're helping to break the silence and talk about these issues that affect every family in America. I'd like to begin with Ann Price. Ms. Price is a career flight attendant, worked for 3 major airlines over the past 40 years. Several years worked as a volunteer employee assistance program representative specializing in substance abuse disorders for her union of Association of Flight Attendants. And I appreciate her being here to share her story tonight and illuminate this issue.
Good evening. My name is Ann Price. I'd like to thank Congressman Dan Hollins, Representative Kennedy, Representative Ron, Representative Moran, Representative Tonko for giving me this opportunity to testify this evening. I'm here because it's my belief that United Behavioral Health violated not only the terms of my insurance policy, but of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, forcing me to participate in an arduous appeals process about the denial of my psychotherapy benefits. I'm a career flight attendant. I was based in London with Pan American World Airways in December 1988, when 14 of my friends were blown out of the sky over Lockerbie, Scotland, by a terrorist bomb. On the morning of September 11th, I was working on an airplane headed for New York when the captain told us to go back and look for potential hijackers in each cabin. After Lockerbie, I didn't know I had post-traumatic stress disorder because I drank until I couldn't feel anything. I am the face of mental illness. I've been diagnosed with PTSD, which is related to my job. I'm also a recovering alcoholic and a drug addict with 21 years clean and sober without relapse. Attached to that disease is a common co-diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder and major depressive disorder. The good news is, with proper medication, a 12-step program, and weekly psychotherapy, not only do I function in my job, but I function very well. The flight attendant profession is no longer glamorous. Our skill sets are basically those of first responders. Service is a very small part of our job. Since 9/11, along with continuous terrorist alerts, our salaries have been cut, our pensions are gone, our layovers are shorter, the carry-on luggage is bigger. It is a high-stress job. In January, UBH began to question the necessity of my weekly psychotherapy. My insurance requires a medical necessity review and denial of benefits for mental health, chiropractic, occupational, and speech therapy in the plan year at the $2,000 mark. Since medical and physical services are not questioned at the same cap, then I believe including mental health with this other group would be one example of a parity violation. Notwithstanding that, just after I paid my deductible well under the $2,000 mark, the first letter from UBH arrived. By March, my therapist was questioned by UBH's review specialist, we'll call him Dr. Bean, PhD, who cut my weekly visits in half. Dr. B never spoke to me. My therapist explained I had little time to socialize because I work all the time, that I'm single and am estranged from my family. Dr. B told her that I needed to get a social life and go to more meetings. My therapist asked him if he would have me relapse to get the same mental health benefits. His consequent response was a positive insinuation. She suggested he speak with my psychiatrist, and he refused. He labeled my treatment maintenance, and her response was, considering that I serve alcohol on the job, deal with volatile people, and that it is a high-stress job, that yes, it is indeed maintenance, staying sober is the goal of my treatment. My belief is UBH setting I would not challenge Dr. B's benefit denial. However, I did, and submitted extra claims, and to my surprise, UBH actually paid the claims. UBH's claims rep told me that my policy entitled me to unlimited mental health visits. She had a copy of Dr. B's letter. I have been unable to obtain a copy of my comprehensive policy, which in fact seems to be aligned with UBH's. It seems to be aligned with parity. If UBH expected me to roll over and not file an appeal, they were wrong about me. Had I claims, their costs would have been cut in half. My question is, how many other people who suffer from in various stages of mental illnesses would be willing to handle the stress involved in answering to somebody like Dr. B in an appeals process? After doing it myself, I can say sadly the odds are in the VH's favor. I found Dr. B's flippant attitude towards my sobriety inexcusable given he works for a mental health insurance company. That this person was allowed to determine a treatment plan for me without speaking to my physician sets a dangerous precedent. And because of that, I do not appreciate UVH playing Russian roulette with my sobriety and my life and my job in order to cut their costs.
Yes.
I do not know if my claims will be paid after my testimony today or after my appeal is processed. What I do know is there will eventually come a time when I feel I can live my life without therapy. But I believe that should be my choice with the approval of my providers, not the choice of my insurance company in order to cut their costs. I thought long and hard about breaking my anonymity to publicly testify today, but if I can speak for those who can't, then it is certainly worth it. Thank you so much for that.
Well, Ann, you started us off just in the right note, because you said you're speaking for everyone else. And the point of this hearing is to start the movement, because as is the case of the civil rights movement, once one person stood up and others stood up, they all supported each other through their collective action that was conducted individually, but ultimately became a movement that was effective because individuals like yourself were willing to stand up against the stress and prejudice that exists. And I salute you for that. And others will benefit because of your ability to fight for not only your benefits, but in fighting for your own benefits, helping everyone else be more successful in getting the treatment that they need. So thank you again, Anna.
Well, let me just first of all join my colleagues here in welcoming all of you. I apologize for being late. Jim Moran and Paul Tonko and I were just voting in the Capitol, and we just got away, so we're a little bit late. But I wanted to first welcome everybody here on behalf of the people of the 8th Congressional District and people from the state of Maryland and the Washington area. And start by thanking all of you who are here to testify today for your powerful words and the lessons I think that we will take away today. I also want to really salute the two gentlemen to my left here, Patrick Kennedy and Jim Ramstad. I'm sure they were very modest in their opening remarks, but these are the co-authors of the parity bill. Republican, Democrat, who put their partisan differences on other issues behind, came together as two human beings who cared passionately about these issues. And the result was the parity legislation that brings us together today. So to Patrick and to Jim, thank you for your courage. Thank you for your perseverance and tenacity, because this law would not be the law of the land without their work. So thank you both very much. I also want to recognize my colleagues, Jim Moran and Paul Tonko. Here's Paul, good. So Jim Moran, of course, represents the congressional district right on the other side of the Potomac River. He's been a long-time champion of issues involving mental health and substance abuse. In fact, more than 35 years ago, before he was a member of Congress, he chaired a board in Alexandria dealing with issues of mental health and substance abuse. And as a member of the Appropriations Committee in the House of Representatives, he's been working very hard to make sure that the resources are available for federal agencies in these very, very important areas. So Jim Moran, thank you for coming across the Potomac River and joining us today. I also also want to thank our colleague Paul Tonko for joining us today. Paul also has worked on these issues for a very long time. He is the co-chair of the Mental Health Caucus in the United States Congress, but he's been involved in these issues long before he came to Congress in the state of New York, which has one of the strongest mental health parity laws. And so, Paul, we thank you for your efforts. I had the privilege of serving with Paul together on the Budget Committee, and I can assure you that we work together to make sure that the resources are available for these very important programs and efforts. So, Paul Tonko from New York, thank you for that. And I will be very brief, because really we're all here to hear from our witnesses. I don't know if you mentioned we have 3 panels. This first panel of people who really have had, as individuals, direct contact with the system, direct experience with the law, and hopefully can tell us from their personal experiences both the strengths but also the weaknesses, especially as we work with the administration to finally put these regulations in place, because we've got to push very hard to do exactly that. It's important to make sure that this law is fully implemented and implemented in the spirit in which the Congress passed it. And we need to make sure that when the regulations are finally issued, that they mirror the intentions of these 2 gentlemen and the members of Congress who passed that legislation. That's why the testimony is so important. So after this panel, we will then hear from some government officials who are responsible for helping implement the law. One from the federal government, one from the state of Maryland, the government of the state of Maryland, and one from Montgomery County. And then we're going to hear a final panel of 2 experts in this area who can also help navigate the way forward. Let me just close by observing that the Affordable Care Act, which of course is on the minds of all of us as the Supreme Court will be issuing an expected opinion on Thursday, that the Affordable Care Act builds on the very important work of the Parity Act. What do I mean by that? The Parity Act made incredible progress, but in the Affordable Care Act, it required those entities providing health insurance on the exchanges, these healthcare exchanges that are created under the Affordable Care Act that will be put in place beginning in 2014, healthcare plans offering their plans on the exchange will be required to offer mental health coverage and addiction services coverage, and they'll be required to meet the requirements of the Parity Act, which is why it's so important, number one, that we put in place regulations that reflect the true intent of the Parity Act, and why it's so important that we extend those benefits through full implementation of the Affordable Care Act, which, of course, right now, a good piece of it is in the hands of the Supreme Court. So we're all awaiting that decision with a great deal of expectation and hope. So without further ado, let me just turn it over briefly to my colleagues who I think want to say just a word of welcome to all of you, and then we'll proceed with the testimony. Jim Moran.
Thank you, Chris. It's not my district, so I won't bother standing up. Chris,
Can't see anybody back there.
Chris and Paul and Jim and I were honored to stand with our former colleague Patrick Kennedy in his relentless campaign to destigmatize and treat mental illnesses. Patrick can take pride of ownership in moving our nation forward in that regard and shaping federal policies that fully improve mental illness and addiction, namely mental health parity. I want to commend Patrick and Jim Ramstad, 2 former colleagues, but they're still friends and leaders. because they have continued their commitment to better mental health policies and practices. Jim has been extraordinary in terms of the courage he has shown in addressing addiction issues, and Patrick's work with our nation's veterans is outstanding and has been really consequential in the lives of many already and will be in the lives of thousands of our veterans who are coping with traumatic brain injury or PTSD. I also want to let you know that if you aren't fully aware that your Congressman Van Hollen, now that Patrick and Jim have retired from the Congress, has taken up the cudgel. It was Mr. Van Hollen who, as the ranking senior Democrat on the Budget Committee, insisted that mental health parity be a priority, even in a constricted budget. And he spoke up. I don't know if many of you, of course, this is Montgomery County. Maybe a fair number of you watch C-SPAN. But if you did, you would see him arguing that it is absolutely essential that this country fully fund the Substance Abuse and Mental Administration, for example. So you just need to be aware of that. I know sometimes people take for granted they're a member of Congress that he's doing the right things, but he's doing more than the right things. This issue particularly has just been extraordinary. But the need is extraordinary, and the stigma does remain. Mental disorders are real, treatable health conditions. But we've allowed stigma, and what up until now has been a sense of hopelessness. Now it is unwarranted sense of hopelessness. We've allowed it to create these attitudinal, structural, and financial barriers to effective treatment and recovery. Mental illnesses, we know, are serious medical illnesses. It's not a matter of overcoming them through willpower, and they're not related to a person's character and intelligence. But while I suspect the people in this room are aware of that, it has taken a long time for the American public to recognize that truth and reality. Experts estimate that 1/5 of Americans suffer from a mental disorder every year. The lifetime prevalence rate is an astonishing 57%. According to the World Health Organization, mental illness accounts for more disability in economically developing countries than any other group of illnesses, including cancer and heart disease. And about 11 million adult Americans suffer from severe mental illness. They did in the last year, and nearly 9 million contemplated serious thoughts of suicide. And a similarly heartbreaking statistic, and this will be the last one I share with you, is that nearly 2 million teens, or 8% of the adolescent population, have experienced a major depressive episode. So this is real serious stuff, and we have got to address it, and the best way to address it is under the parity law, which, thanks to Patrick's leadership, was passed before the Affordable Care Act. So the Supreme Court can't negate that. Now, let me just, I'm going to breeze through all the rest of this, because by virtue of the fact that you're here, I trust we're preaching to the choir, but you can be assured that we will insist that the parity law be fully implemented. And in conjunction with mandatory coverage under the Essential Benefits and the Affordable Care Act, all Americans will have access to needed mental health and addiction coverage. And with that wider access, research is going to advance and better treatments are going to emerge to help all those in need. This is very important. It needs to take place around the country, and we appreciate all the folks who have been involved in putting this forum together tonight. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Take this down. Right. It's a pleasure to join with all of you this evening, and to our host, Chris Van Hollen, who has indicated that we've worked together on the Budget Committee. It's been a pleasure to work with Chris because of his passion to make a difference with the federal budget that speaks to human causes like those we're addressing tonight. To serve with him and Jim Moran is an honor because these gentlemen care so deeply about making a difference in our budget. Jim, we didn't have the chance to serve together side by side as much as I did with Patrick. And speak about passion. The drive to bring dignity to the equation, to speak to social justice, and the morally sound thing to do. It's all packaged within Patrick Kennedy. And it's an honor to be able to fight the fights. I hail from upstate New York, Montgomery County, New York. So I want to throw that out there. The general really got his name known. He's hit a lot of states. But Chris, it's great to share that label. We talked about familiarity with the issue. For the sake of issue clarification in New York, got involved because I thought it was the right thing to do. We got more deeply invested through a little leaguer that I called a constituent. And Timothy O'Clair and I met a number of times on the baseball field for opening games and visits to the Little League Park. He had the dreams every youngster would have. Cute as a button, big eyes, and wanting to do something someday. He would share his dreams with you. But unfortunately, Tim was diagnosed with a mental illness and two mental health disorders. And Timothy lost his fight because at a tender age, he completed suicide. His parents taught me to say it that way. He did not commit anything wrong. He completed suicide because the system failed him and his family. Painful exercise. I picked up the bill to be lead sponsor. When I did so, I knew that I was going to have to invest in a learning curve and invest in time. Commit the time to a cause that deserved every bit of my energy and every bit of my studying the issue. What I did meditate was the emotional curve. People from every corner of New York State would call every week. Understandably so, because the fear, the unknown, the uncertainty would cause them to perhaps fall into relapse. It was painful. When you heard that testimony over and over again, it just pronounced for me the reality of the pain and the misfortune and the unnecessary struggle at times that individuals and their family members had to make. And so I did everything I could do to work with the advocacy group. I can tell you here, unabashedly, the most significant constituency I've ever worked with is the mental health advocacy community. They would be there after midnight burning candles at the state capitol in Albany and very, very calmly asking us to do the right thing. My friends, this went on for years, but we wouldn't give up on the struggle because Timothy's memory was driving us. His parents would come to town and ask to visit with legislators, carrying the scrapbook of Timothy with them, showing us pictures of the snowman they built at Timothy's gravesite. They were doing this as a part of healing, but they were doing it because it was the right thing to do. And they were going to make correctness part of their mission for Timothy. It was a real struggle. I remember his parents telling me that they had to disown their child in order to continue to get care. Tom O'Clair did the tough job of sitting down with his son, saying, buddy, we love you beyond belief, but we have to give you up so that you can get the health care you need. This in the America we love, this in the land of opportunity, unacceptable. Unacceptable. So we drove it until we finally were victorious. And what a celebration it was for Timothy to pass Timothy's law in the state of New York, and then to have it further underpinned by the support of the Kennedy family and Congress here, and the federal government putting together its own parity and addition, equity, an important piece of the action, so that justice and dignity can be brought to the equation for individuals. It was a powerful statement that we made in New York. It was a powerful moment. And when his dad shouted over to me at the celebration on the Capitol steps after the passage, he said, "What are you thinking now, Paul Tonko?" I said, "Somewhere in heaven there's a little leaguer who's applauding all of us." I was applauding all of us. It was my proudest moment in my New York State legislative career. And I want to thank all of you for who you are. But you make the difference. You make the battle known, and we have to continue to make certain that after the victory in the halls of government, the implementation of rules and regs are keeping within the spirit of what we embraced for a final outcome. To make certain that the scope of services, what they ought to be, that there isn't a shortcut and an undercurrent that dismantles the progress that is struck by law change. So I'm here with you proudly tonight to say thank you to the Parity Implementation Coalition, and to Patrick Kennedy and my colleagues like Chris Van Hollen and Jim Moran, who are in that hall of government today, making certain that we can be the stewards of this change, to make certain it is the outcome we have all dreamt of. It's an honor to be with you.
Thank you. Good job. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your leadership in New York. Thank you for your passion. And thank you for the example that New York set for the Congress in passing this. And now, without further ado, I want to go back to those who have come here to share their experiences so that we can be sure that when the final chapters are written on this law, it does in fact reflect the spirit and intent. Everybody in this room has been part of this important cause. So now I would like to introduce Adrian and Diana Bessa Nelson. Mr. Adrian Bessa Nelson, Captain Bessa Nelson, is a graduate of West Point. He received the Army Bronze Star for valor for his efforts to stop a group of insurgents in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Captain Bessa Nelson was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, after his second deployment. Following his retirement from the Army, he and Diana remain very active in the military community and are committed to breaking the stigma associated with PTSD. We want to thank both of you very much for being here, and we'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity. As you guys know, my name is Adrian Bessa Nelson. I'm the president and co-founder of the Visible Wound and Retired Army Captain. I've been suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder since 2006. I was diagnosed with it in 2008. I graduated from the United States Military Academy in 2004 and was commissioned as an armor officer in the United States Army. While in the Army, I served 2 tours in Iraq as part of the 10th Mountain Division. My first tour had me involved in very, very heavy fighting in western Baghdad over the course of 1 year's deployment. My second tour, less than a year after the first one ended, Secretary Cook up in the northern part of the country as an advisor of the Iraqi Army for another 15 months. I began experiencing post-traumatic stress partway through my first deployment to Iraq. It's hard to say exactly which effect caused it. It might have been the terrorists that I killed. It might have been the 30 or so roadside bombs in my vehicle. Or it might have been the dead civilians I took care of when I had children. What I do know is when we returned from Iraq, we partied just because we were happy to be alive. Somewhere along the way, that celebration ended though, and the self-medication began. I couldn't relax. I couldn't sleep. Ever. Nothing seemed fun anymore. The world was black and white. And so I drank. All the time. I drank at work, I drank before work, I drank after work, and any other time in between. And it stopped because I deployed again, and you're not allowed to drink when you were in Iraq. Upon my return from my second deployment, I realized that my life was not going the way that I wanted to go. And I asked for help for my post-traumatic stress and began my very long road to recovery, which involved more than a month in a specialized outpatient treatment facility at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. And ultimately resulted in me getting medically retired from the Army in April of last year. Before I get into my purpose and perspective, I wanted to give you guys some statistics. The first of which is 18 veterans a day kill themselves. Also, during the first 155 days of 2012, 154 suicides occurred in the United States Army alone. I want to extrapolate that to the larger picture and say, well, what about in our military, which consists of several million men and women bravely serving our country? And what about the 20 or 30 million so veterans that are out in our community now? Well, what do those statistics mean on that larger population? And what do they mean on the even larger population of people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder? Those are astounding numbers. In fact, I had a friend of mine kill himself several weeks ago. So I'm here today to speak to you from several perspectives. The first of which is as an advocate, speaking for our nation's veterans and soldiers who are suffering from wounds of physical and invisible who cannot speak for themselves in a forum like this. Several months ago, before Dion and I really got involved in this doing advocacy, I was with several of my soldiers that I'm involved in treatment with, and there was a media interview going on, and they asked if any of us wanted to speak. And having PTSD, I of course didn't want to speak. Neither did any of us. Just trying to get 5 or 6 people with PTSD and get one of them to talk on camera. It's a pretty tough thing to do. All of them, they were all senior non-commissioned officers. They all looked at me and said, "Sir, you need to do this because you need to speak for us." And that really resonated with me. And rang true that I need to be the voice for many people who cannot speak for themselves. Second, I'm also speaking as a veteran myself, diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. I want to bring up a couple of different points. Number one would be the barrier to care, particularly for veterans. First of which is, we've already spoken about a little bit, is the stigma involved in post-traumatic stress. There are two forms of the stigma. The first one is external, the second being internal. And the external stigma, particularly for veterans, is huge. Coming out of the workplace, when we come home, we're expected to be normal, expected just to sort of go back to daily life. But it doesn't quite work that way when we've dealt with the horrors of war. And then, when people get out, they try to do their best to the end. But it's having PTSD in that situation is very difficult because people are very concerned that, maybe if you're crazy, there's always the thought that as a veteran, and again, I'm not small, with me having PTSD, I'm very concerned discussing it at work. I don't want people to think that, well, I'm crazy, I'm gonna go off and try to hurt somebody. It's a very, very real concern. Especially in light of the negative news coverage that post-traumatic stress has gotten among soldiers over the past 6 months. And the other thing is the fear that people are going to take it that way, and whether it's real or not, whether people really do perceive that or really are going to treat someone that way, it doesn't matter if it prevents people from going and getting the care that they need. Additionally, there's an extreme fear of significant increased healthcare costs associated with this psychological disorder. As veterans and like everybody else that has post-traumatic stress, I'm supposed to have, it never chose to be dealing with this. And in fact, it's come about as a result of a very, very traumatic event. And so the fact that when we go and try to function in normal society, healthcare costs increase should you try to get help for your post-traumatic stress. It makes it very, very difficult for those to get care. And frequently many veterans are young, unskilled, not necessarily very well educated. And the jobs that they're able to get in this economy probably aren't going to necessarily have the kind of benefits that are needed to give them the insurance they need in the first place. So that's why veterans, and I'm going to tell you a brief anecdote about my own personal experiences. Just because somebody wants to try to get back overseas does not make them immune to potential problems that can happen every day, as I found out about a month ago. I woke up early because I didn't sleep well, as usual. I went to go get a cup of coffee early on a Sunday morning because my wife was asleep and I didn't want to wake her by grinding the coffee. On my way home, An 18-year-old on the way home from the American Cancer Society's Relay for Life fell asleep at the wheel, crossing the center line of the road and hit my truck head on. We were both going 55 miles an hour. This is a very unfortunate event that could happen to anyone at any time. Driving is a very hazardous thing, but we often forget. To me, however, I thought that Al-Qaeda had found me, and I thought that it was a car bomb. I swerved out of the way, and the vehicle kept coming. It hit me head on. I'm fortunate to be here tonight, but that's not the reason I tell you the story. I tell you the story to relate how a simple event like this, it set me back substantially. According to my therapist, probably several years, if not before where I was when I started getting my treatment in 2008. I'm much worse now than I was before. I'm much more hypervigilant, less trusting. I have panic attacks on my drive to work, which I suppose the Beltway could probably do that to anybody. For a veteran, panic attacks are not exactly the safest thing to be dealing with. No way either. I also frequently have flashbacks driving. Again, I guess you can have flashbacks when you leave the Beltway. It might scar the rest of us for the rest of our lives. Another point, many leaving the military want nothing to do with it. Frequently, when soldiers enlist in contracts end when they return from their deployment. When that happens, in my experience with many of the soldiers I've dealt with, they just want to get out as far away from the military as possible, as far away from their service, the time in the military. They just want to go back and try to be normal. Often, combat-related issues go undiagnosed for years because when there are the systems in place to diagnose them, they either lie or just try to go through it as quickly as they can just to get out. Because it's usually done at 4 o'clock on a Thursday before a 4-day weekend right after you come back from Iraq. You still need what you want to do. But they often go undiagnosed, untreated for years and years. Because they just want to close that chapter in their lives and move on and try to be somebody else. Try not to be the soldiers that they were. It's created a lot of challenges for veterans, if you can imagine. When they leave the service in its environment, they go back to an America that's generally uninformed and uncompassionate as to the issues that those dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder face. And that doesn't go just for veterans, but for anybody dealing with post-traumatic stress. Additionally, post-traumatic stress in general, leads to a lack of trust. It's very difficult to take somebody's authority at face value when you can't trust anything, when you're always weary. And that includes your physician, that includes your insurance company. You don't want to listen to anybody. And then the symptoms of PTSD in general make it very difficult to get treatment. It's very hard to go and sit into a doctor's office and wait in line when you can't stand to be around people. A clinical environment or going to a hospital is not a lot of fun for any of us, but it's really not a lot of fun when being in groups of more than 3 are panic attack inducing. So I just ask that we take this into consideration and move forward and try to correct these injustices so that so that we can get the care that we need. Thank you.
Like I was trying to watch the time cards and say, what attention I wanted to say, like, no, that's not. My name is Gianna Nelson. Thank you for having us. First of all, giving us the opportunity to advocate for veterans and the PTSD community as a whole, which is not just veterans, it's a huge group of people. I find it very interesting that it's such a silent group when really, and this is just the veterans group alone, I had that 27% of veterans are diagnosed with PTSD, which is often not diagnosed, which is a problem. And if 7.7% of any population or group is diagnosed with anything considered a pandemic, so I find that very interesting. So that's a very large, silent group of people that I'm happy to be advocating for, and thanks for everything that you're doing for them. It's a huge group of people that I hope will be motivated to be, there's no stopping that many people if they're willing to stand up the way some people are, so that's wonderful. My husband and I sit at the general organization that focuses on PTSD. By doing this, we've come in contact with a wide range of veterans and their families and are here to share their stories. Those who are bound by PTSD is a stigma, the professional repercussions that all too often accompany this diagnosis. I speak to you today not as someone with post-traumatic stress disorder, but someone in support of a family member with a severe form of this condition. Aside from being affected daily, spouses are often a gateway to healthcare for veterans and others affected by PTSD. The military community has recognized the hardship placed on the families of those that are managing PTSD at home, often a lifetime condition, and it is offering some ways to support caregivers. As with many psychological conditions, treating the patient is not a solution, but providing the family with the support and tools to continue with daily life is a responsibility. There are currently no long-term solutions for veterans with PTSD available to me or my husband, aside from a handful of acute care options that are template and very generalized and not catered to the individual needs of those, not just those with PTSD, but further distanced by those who are also with the barriers in the military community. I've seen firsthand the barriers that the condition itself brings. Group therapy, individual therapy, although helpful, are limited by the nature of the condition as we talked about, but also by a lack of understanding and education on behalf of the medical community, which is substantial and terrifying. Treatment options like electrical therapy, acupuncture, EMDR, yoga, transcendental meditation, massage, canine, and equine therapy have all been proven effective methods of managing post-traumatic stress disorder. They're not alternatives, they're not supplemental, they're a requirement, and they should be used, or at least explored as provided as an option. And these options are not only not available, they're unheard of. There's something to be said about trying to get through daily living with someone suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, even going out to dinner could be an event. A veteran, I don't recall which one it was, I'm sure at some point I should probably give him credit, but he, whenever we go out to dinner with a group of veterans, it's actually very funny, and I know that it's something with people with post-traumatic stress disorder all the time. With their backs to the wall, everyone will sit. So try to go to a restaurant with a bunch of people that like dancing around, and it looks like the Last Supper. Standing there, so you can always tell when you're in a community that has those kind of stress, so everyone wants their backs to the wall. It's a kind of self-awareness that if everyone had it would be fantastic. Well, we are limited by the medical community's knowledge of the condition, understanding of its progress, and the inclination to immediately over-medicate. Barriers to care are further compounded for at least the veteran community, by military communication and culture barriers that substantially hinder communication between patients and providers. The VA in San Francisco's new study that was presented just last week, I'd like to take a second and just quote the article. Some 23 million veterans, like so many people, will later face common illnesses such as cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's as a function of regular aging. But a growing body of work shows that these diseases may be exacerbated by traumatic stress. Researchers have said, for example, veterans with PTSD are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop heart disease than those that do not have the disorder. And my fear is now that not only will this population and their families not receive the long-term informed health data that we need, but that the insurance community will find a way to determine it's a pre-existing condition when they inevitably the effects of this condition worsen over time. As with any disability, it's the responsibility of the insurance companies to provide adequate, consistent, and comprehensive care to ensure a manageable quality of life. At the very least, for the veterans, for the community who suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, all of it, and their families that support them, they're often left in the shadows. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you, and Adrian, thank you for your service to our country. Kind of comment on what your wife talked about in terms of a lot of veterans not getting their care through the VA, but in fact, the majority of them will get their care through the private insurance system and through their private employer if they're fortunate enough to get a job in life. So, but would you comment on the need for parity to be in place, because it will end up protecting our veterans in large respect because of their inability to get needed care from the VA or wanting to even go into the VA when they first got out of the military, as you pointed out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say personally that there are some phenomenal programs that the VA has, but The major challenges they face are, they've got very poor reputations in the veteran community. They're also so very backlogged when it comes to processing claims. Right now, the average time to process a claim is, I think, about 2 years. That's a little bit long to wait to get yourself taken care of, especially if you're dealing with severe post-traumatic stress. It's absolutely critical that the care be implemented for veterans. Because without it, there's not going to be any national standard of care. As we've said before, right now the general treatment idea is, diagnose, give a pill, and then we bill. The problem is it's a very, very complicated medical condition that cannot be treated with a simple medication. It requires a 360-degree approach in order to treat that. It requires not only treating the person suffering, but it also requires support for the family. That is something that even soldiers who use the VA system do not get. The VA will take very good, if you're lucky enough to get into the VA, when it eventually happens, they take phenomenal care of the soldier, but only the soldier. There's nothing to take care of the family. My wife can very much attest how difficult it is being married to somebody and supporting somebody who has post-traumatic stress. But without that sort of clarity, the statistics that I've quoted, they're just going to go up. I mean, the 27% of veterans coming home with post-traumatic stress it's a very low estimate, and that's what's diagnosed. That's not what is actually prevalent.
Let me just join Patrick, and I know all my colleagues want to thank you for your service. We have the privilege in this congressional district of representing the new consolidated Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Mr. Moran's District of Police, Fort Belvoir, and all of us look forward to working with you and other vendors to make sure that the care you get there is the best in the world. And as Patrick points out, after that, when we transition to the private healthcare system, of course, maintaining that quality is also a challenge. So thank you. We're now going to take hear from Dr. Berger, and then we'll also open it up more fully to other questions. Dr. Berger is a dentist who practiced in Virginia Beach. I now believe you're practicing with your son in the practice of dentistry. Dr. Berger is an alumnus of Villanova University, in the University of Kentucky School of Dentistry, and is here today sharing with us his experience so that we can take those experiences and try and make sure that we fully implement the law. Thank you, Dr. Berger.
Congressman Van Haney, Congressman Kennedy, Congressman Romstead, Congressman Moran, and Congressman Tonko. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to appear before you this evening to share my experience seeking help for my alcoholism and the difficulties I've experienced in retrieving addiction benefits on par with other medical benefits covered under my health plan, Anthony's of Virginia. I was a successful dentist for more than 20 years. I remain a consultant in my son's dental practice to this day. I paid premium to fund the group health plan during that entire period. I was under psychiatric treatment from August 2010 until December 2010 in an effort to control my drinking. Unfortunately, the results were less than regarded as best. The psychiatrist stated that if I could not control my drinking, I'd have to go to an institution for alcohol treatment and rehabilitation. At this point, my alcohol consumption progressed to a life-threatening proportion. By April 21st, 2011, when I needed to utilize the alcoholism benefit promised under my plan and prepared to admit myself to an alcohol treatment center, those benefits were not readily available. Precisely at the time, my drinking had thrown me into a death spiral and my family's life into crisis. As a physician, I understand the competing pressures of cost, quality, and access that burdens the healthcare system. I understand the current healthcare reimbursement system It is unsustainable, and that managed care can play a mediating influence on overutilization of healthcare services. But I'm here today about fairness and what is just, to shine a light on the difference between what is promised under a plan and what is delivered. The lack of transparency patients and their families face every day in trying to access addictive benefits, and the lack of health plan compliance and accountability, even in the face of the federal parity law. Many of you in this room tonight spent years getting passed. As a healthcare provider, I'm familiar with the healthcare claim and reimbursement process. I had many employees over the years help with the mountains of paperwork generated by claims in my dental practice. For those not as familiar as I am with this process, frustration and anguish often lead people to just give up and go without the help for their addiction problems until they end up unemployed and become the taxpayer's problem. I did not give up. Although I have now exhausted my internal and external appeal processes, and because I continued fighting, I was finally promised 70% coverage. After satisfying an additional $750 out of the network deductible for the dates of April 21st, 2011 through May 10th, 2011, a total of 20 days. This guaranteed reimbursement of 20 days for a 28-day medically and psychologically necessary for residential stay. As of today, I received no reimbursement. I needed medical stabilization. I had to undergo substantial retraining, psychological treatment to aid and maintain my recovery. I learned after the fact that my plan required that I failed first. An outpatient treatment with 3 months prior to entering residential treatment before my plan was dead. While you all here are the experts on the federal parity law, I understand that the plan must document how it applies the fail first requirement on other medical conditions. I received no documentation of this, only over 25 pages of behavioral health medical necessity criteria. Nothing on how these provisions are applied to comparable medical conditions. Because I got the help I needed, I am healthy. So for the past 432 days. As a result, I incur overall lower health care costs. I'm getting a new lease on life, being a good husband to my wonderful, loving wife, a father who is there for his talented, compassionate son, and of course, a tax-paying citizen instead of a drain on the system. I hope the rules governing this law are finalized and enforced so that others can receive the same opportunity for a renewed life that I now gratefully and humbly live. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and please answer any of your questions.
I'm going to ask my colleagues if they have any questions for any of your panel. Thank you very much for your very powerful and informative testimony.
Not a question, but just a comment. You kind of shedding a glimmer of hope. In New York, under the guidance of Timothy's Law, this past May, the very first fines were levied against 15 companies for $2.7 million worth of fines. Good job, encouragement to continue to keep the push going to make certain that the law does what it's supposed to do, and that there's penalties for that.
Dr. Berger and Ann, you both talked about how you had to go out of your way to keep fighting and appealing and appealing. And I wonder if you could comment about how many others you would imagine would just turn away after being denied by their insurance, because that's their approach, is to count on people just not doing what the two of you did in order to seek redress. So if you could comment about how important that is and how fortunate it is that people need to fight for
life-saving medical care when it comes to these illnesses.
Congressman Kennedy, the problem, I think, is that what I said before, is that they were betting that I was not going to challenge them. I had the benefit. And I didn't find that out until I did submit the claim. The thing that really bothered me is this is a bullying tactic. You know, you've heard so much in the news about being bullied. I felt that I think they're bullying mentally ill people. And, you know, this results in death. You know, depression is just as deadly as cancer. And, you know, I'm 21 years clean and sober. I'm so stressed out. I worked every single day off that I had. I have the tools. I have a degree in English. I have a friend who is a fantastic lawyer that helps me with the appeals process. And I worked every day off for 4 months to file a 25-page appeal. What is somebody who's newly sober going to do? They're not going to do it. And they're not going to, I had providers who were compassionate, who were willing to defer payments. I'm sorry, I think that people are going to end up not getting treatment. I think people are going to get sicker. I think people are going to die. I think people are going to get drunk. I'm sorry, I think that people are going to end up not getting the treatment, and I think people are getting bullied by their insurance companies, and it's got to stop, and that's why I'm here.
And as a fairly fresh, sober individual, after coming out of my rehab, I started working with Anthem to try to get some restitution from them, only to find that phone calls were lost, pages were lost. Dr. Who? I'm sorry, what's your group number? You've only been on since 1992. I'm sorry. You have no benefits for that coverage. So I had to learn the insurance business. It's one thing to play the shell game if there's a P somewhere under one of those shells. Still a P there somewhere. I hadn't found the right shell yet. I'm not going to stop. I would help anybody at any time, you know, to do what I've done. Not that great a thing. Just have to continue. Stay sober, work it. Thank God you're sober, or you had nothing. That's all I have.
Just briefly, Doctor, what rationale did your health plan give you for requiring you to fail first at outpatient care before offering inpatient treatment, regardless of other medical necessity?
Yeah, they never gave me any rationale whatsoever. Matter of fact, I had to find that in the 25 pages on my own of the medical necessities, okay, so the criteria for medical necessity for treatment, to find that I had to fail because I went to a psychiatrist who told me that I had to go to an in-treatment facility for alcoholism and for rehabilitation. I didn't realize I had to be within 3 months. I realized I had to go. I made the decision to go. I went. You know, I'm sober. I took the advice of an attending physician or a psychiatrist at that point, and went and said I may be several tens of thousands of dollars less wealthy now, but I am sober.
So that's outrageous, discriminatory, I would even argue illegal action by the health plan is so counterproductive to them. We have all the empirical data in the world to show that treatment is cost effective. The average untreated alcoholic or addict incurs health care costs 100% higher than yours or mine, people who have been treated. 100% higher health care costs. And I should also point out, in fairness, that at the end of this legislative process, what was the end of the legislative process before the bill was signed by President Bush. We did have 8 enlightened national health plans that supported our legislation after they saw the empirical data that showed for every dollar spent on treatment, $12 are saved, and that the bottom line was served by offering treatment. So we have a big education job ahead of us, obviously, continuing education job, if you will. And I just hope and I pray that the administration will see fit to issue a final rule sooner rather than later, because there are too many people, like the very articulate witnesses who have appeared here tonight so far, who are being hurt. Too many people are dying from PTSD, from alcoholism, from other drug addiction. It's a national epidemic. We're talking about 80 million people when you think of the 26 million Americans suffering the ravages of alcoholism and 54 million suffering from mental illness. That's 80 million Americans suffering from one or both of these diseases. So I want to thank you again, Doctor, and all the members of the first panel for the courage that you exhibit in coming forward. Thank you.
Captain, I have a question for you with respect to the military, because and I guess my question is the extent to which you believe the military has made progress in coming to grips with overcoming its at least initial reluctance to acknowledge the sort of depth and breadth of the problem with respect to PTSD and its reluctance to encourage people to come forward, and whether or not you've seen any change in that attitude with respect to the stigma and their willingness to, again, encourage men and women serving in the military to come forward, or whether there's still a reluctance to do that and a desire to try and sweep this under the what kind of progress have you seen?
Well, I can tell you this is a conversation that could probably go on for a couple hours on. And now I'm not going to do my response is very, very different than it would have been about a year and a half ago. But what I will say is that there have been leaps and bounds made. The stigma, there's no official stigma. There are no longer any official repercussions for getting treatment or getting help. Regardless of whether it's alcoholism, drug addiction, or stress. If you raise your hand and say, hey, I've got a problem, you self-refer to mental health, there will be help. The question now is how effective can that help be? And I will tell you that I'm very fortunate. When I'm fortunate with a couple of number one, I was an officer. Number two, my father's a physician.